In the world's history, despite rather conflicting opinions, Balduin IV can be considered one of the most talented rulers, commanders, and politicians. History has given him too little time, but this time the king without a face, as his subjects called him, did perhaps more than all other rulers in a much more extensive reign. Today we will tell you about King Balduin IV and his rule. You are now watching Flipside of History. The King of Jerusalem, Balduin IV, was the only son of the king of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Amaury I. From childhood, the boy was characterized by a lively mind, curiosity, and a natural talent for leadership. His father personally trained his son, teaching him to ride a horse, to wield a sword and a spear, and the fundamentals of battle tactics. Amaury I was always impressed that his offspring fairly calmly endured pain, either by falling from a horse or being struck with a wooden sword. Unfortunately, at the age of 9, the ability not to feel physical pain was explained by the scholar and chronicler of the kingdom, Guillaume of Tyre. It turned out that the boy was ill with the leprosy. Even nowadays, this disease is quite challenging and difficult to cure, but in those days, those who had leprosy were outcasts of society. When the unfortunate person was diagnosed with the disease, he was quickly expelled from society. First, there was the burial ceremony, when the patient was wrapped in a shroud and buried, and then, by hanging a bell around the person's neck, the sufferer was banished from the town or village. The boy's destiny after his deadly diagnosis was decided by the Knights of the Order of St. Lazarus. This order was concerned with caring for the sick and even admitted into its ranks knights who were ill with leprosy. The Knights of the Order, who incidentally were patronized by King Amaury I himself, publicly swore that leprosy was not a contagious disease and also promised that they would protect the young heir with arms in their hands. Balduin therefore did not go to the leprosarium, but remained in the walls of the palace. The boy understood that fate had given him very little time, so he decided to devote his whole life exclusively to service for the good of the kingdom. When he turned 13 years old, in 1174, the king died, and the throne was ruled by a regent, the Seneschal Mille de Plancy. But after the appearance in Jerusalem of the young king's uncle, Count Raymond, the guardian died a strange death relatively quickly, and his place was immediately taken by the count. And here young Balduin showed his talent as a very competent strategist and politician. While the barons at court intrigued to claim the throne, the boy was quietly studying the situation and preparing to strike a decisive blow. The matter was that no one took seriously the possibility of the long-term rule of the ill heir. The barons and other palace intriguers believed that the king's days were numbered, so all the intrigue swirled around Balduin's sisters. At the time, Jerusalem existed under constant threat of attack by the powerful and talented Saracen lord Saladin, Salah ad-Din, who had made a vow that he would free the city from foreigners and restore it to its former glory. So Balduin, who had no sense and no opportunity to waste his time on festivals, courting ladies, intrigues, and so on, set about fortifying his kingdom. Incidentally, the young king was aware that Raymond was conspiring against him. Even during his first campaign against the city of Damascus, as soon as the army left Jerusalem, the royal secretary concluded a truce with Saladin behind the king's back. So Balduin IV had no one to fight with in Damascus. The king without a face was well aware that he could not give peace to his kingdom without outside help. He needed the support of one of the most powerful knightly orders, the Templars, as well as a navy. In 1176, when the regency ended, Balduin IV dissolved the peace treaty with Saladin and set out again for Damascus, forcing Saladin to retreat to Aleppo. At the same time, Balduin IV ransomed from captivity Guinée de Châtillon, nephew of the Byzantine king, and he bought him back for an utterly fantastic amount, 120,000 gold coins. For the sake of justice, it must be said that the freed captive fully justified his release. The Templar Knights had provided great assistance to Balduin IV's army in all battles with Saladin. The fleet of the Byzantine Empire did not go to the aid because the imperial admiral who commanded the fleet suddenly and unexpectedly died. In all of the battles that followed, the young king successfully defeated Saladin's forces, which outnumbered Jerusalem's army several times more. In doing it, the young king, himself dressed in fully covered clothes, with a mask on his face, always fought at the leading ranks of his army. On April 10, 1179, during the Battle of Mougizar, Balduin IV dueled with Saladin's nephew, but the king could not hold the leash and fell from his horse. The enemy, rejoiced at what he saw, was about to celebrate his victory, but the young king was saved at the cost of his life by Marshal Onfroy II, and the army of Jerusalem, seeing that the king was still alive, was again victorious. Balduin IV's courage and selflessness evoked unconcealed respect even from Saladin himself, who referred to the young king as a boy. As long as this boy is in Jerusalem, the city will not fall. The most unbelievable thing is that King Balduin IV's successes forced Saladin to come out with an offer of peace. It was not just unbelievable, it was a fantasy. So it is not surprising that the king without a face, who was able to force the enemy to negotiate, became a national hero. It is thanks to this young king that a peace, albeit fragile, prevailed in the Palestinian lands. Unfortunately, having conquered the threat of war, the young king was unable to conquer his own sickness. Soon he could no longer walk, and then, in 1183, he went completely blind. Hence, the throne was given to the regent, Guy de Lusignac, husband of Balduin's own sister. However, against the king's high expectations, he proved to be a weak, cowardly, and indecisive ruler. 2 years later, as Balduin's second sister was celebrating her marriage at the castle of Kerak, the city was under siege by Saladin's troops, who had broken the peace treaty. Guy de Lusignac was incapable of organizing a competent defense, not to mention fending off Saladin's army. As a result, Balduin IV, now completely blind and almost helpless on a gurney, was again obliged to lead the march and, once again, to defeat the enemy. Besides, it was only because of Guy de Lusignac's cowardice and indecision that King Balduin was unable to capture Saladin himself, although the opportunity presented itself during the battle. When Balduin IV's army managed to break through the ring of encirclement, Guy de Lusignac did not dare to pursue the defeated enemy across the desert, remaining in the castle. Eventually, the regent was degraded, and Balduin even tried to dissolve Guy de Lusignac's marriage to his sister, but the Church of Jerusalem was flatly opposed to such a decision. What is interesting is that Balduin eventually succeeded in dissolving the marriage, but Guy de Lusignac proved to be an even greater coward later on. He refused to come to Jerusalem on the king's orders for trial, and when the king Balduin IV himself arrived at his castle in Gaza, he simply refused to let him in. Eventually, all of Guy de Lusignac's possessions and lands were confiscated. Still hoping that a new successor would be much better, Balduin gave the crown to his nephew, Balduin de Montferrat, who became Balduin V, and, as it turned out later, the last king of Jerusalem. Unable to withstand the latest disruptions, Balduin IV died on March 16, 1185, at the age of 24. His successor, disappointingly, was not distinguished from the talents of his uncle, preferring simply to repel Saladin's attacks by sitting inside the fortress. As a result of this, 2 years later, Saladin's army went to storm Jerusalem, which ended in success. The city fell and the history of the Kingdom of Jerusalem ended forever. When some historians accuse King Balduin of being incapable of dealing with the internal affairs of the kingdom and that he also failed to achieve impressive results in the external sector, they forget a lot of things. First off, despite the title of the king, Balduin IV was not entirely free in his decision-making. He had to coordinate every step he took with the Jerusalem bureaucracy, the ministers of the orders, the High Curia, and the clerical authorities. It should be said that not all the army was subordinate to Balduin. Nearly half of the entire army, namely crusaders, was under the authority of the church, and the church was separated from secular power. So willingly or unwillingly, the young king was forced to pursue such a policy so that his actions would be supported by the church as well. Otherwise, he was doomed to failure. And it must be stated that, in spite of everything, it was exactly Balduin who proved himself to be a great military leader, admired by the invincible Salah ad-Din himself, who said, "It seems that Allah does not want their kingdom to fall under this king." Thank you for watching this episode. You were watching Flip Side of History. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment your thoughts down below. Apart from that, watch our other videos.